Welcome to Impact 2025, our program where we have our continuing conversation where we talk about all different types of topics, race, religion, current events, everything that you can think of. And as we always say, this is your opportunity to join in the conversation, to be a part of the conversation, where you can type in your questions and your comments into the comment section, and we will address those as we have our conversation, that general conversation of what's going on. And so it is a conversation. So feel free to type in what you want to say, and it will be brought up on the screen and discussed. So it won't be just a one-way exercise. As always, what I like to do first is to remind you of the other programs and offerings that we have here. On Thursday nights, we have Thursday Thirst, which is our weekly Bible study. That is at 7 o'clock here on YouTube and Facebook. On Sundays at 10 o'clock, we have worship service. That's 10 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. So you're on Facebook, YouTube, and in person, and it's better in person. And then on Tuesdays at 7 o'clock, we have a time of prayer so that everybody in the ministry can pray together. That's from 7 to 7:45. Just have to pray sometime during that time. And so those are the other things that we have available. Back to the prayer, you can call in at the number that's on the screen, leave a prayer request, but then also pray. So make sure that you're not just leaving a request and not praying. And then, of course, 8 o'clock Tuesdays, Impact 2025. That's the program that you're on right this second. So today's topic is going through some different research issues or research topics when it comes to young people. And, just looking through and kind of saying, like, what are young people of today going through? They gave the different ages, the gambit of different issues. They were all putting them out there. But there was a common theme that was put out. And this is not a new theme, but many of the issues, bullying, peer pressure, image issues, the same old that kids have had for years and years and years. It may look a little different in the 70s than it looked in the 2020s, and it may look a little different in the 2010s than it did in the 1980s or the 90s or whatever. It may look a little different in the 20s than it looked in the 1920s than it looks in the 2020s. But you still have those issues, the issues of, again, image, peer pressure, bullying, all of those type of things. But one of the things that was glaring, and it is a question for us who are adults, it's a question for us. One of the themes that came up was, with all of these issues of the bullying and the issues and the body issues and peer pressure, social media, that's new. One of the top issues was role models. Who are they looking to? So when they have these issues, because again, most of it is confidence and image issues, who do they go to kind of look at as an example? Now, in the past, I don't know, you had different people who were examples. You had a lot of folk on TV, and when you're looking in different times in history, you had different individuals. So a couple of years back, people were looking at, if you were a young person, you were looking at Obama. You're like, oh, it's a good role model. If you look further back into the civil rights movement, you had a myriad of different people. If you were a person of color, you had a myriad of different people to look at, and then other folk as well. If you want to keep in the present thing of Obama, when people will look at JFK or RFK or any of those guys back then, and you had people to look up to, positive role models. Sports came and became a big thing here in the U.S., and then you had some kind of sports people to look up to, and some of them took their roles and their responsibilities really seriously, trying to make sure that they were clean cut and everything like that. But the question now is, who do young people have to look up to? Diving down, going down the rabbit hole, who do they have to look up to? Well, you got a couple of famous people. Young girls are looking up to Taylor Swift. And then you have young guys, they have a couple of rappers and things that they look up to. They do have basketball players, like you'll have LeBron James. But when you look at it, and this is my thought process, and maybe yours as well, depending on what you think about. Are there the positive role models out there for young people to look up to the same way there was before. And if there is not, if we have we don't have them, then why not? And so what I'll say is, at looking at things and then looking at what some of the, again, going down this rabbit hole. Well, then who are the role, type it in. Who are the role models that the kids look up to, or who are kids looking at now? The list was very depressing for me. And then maybe it's because I'm old. But when they started bringing up names of folk, I was like, it didn't seem too great. When you're thinking about people looking to reality TV stars, that doesn't seem too great. When you're thinking about the younger people who are looking up to social media personalities, most of these kids are the same, not too much older than them, and most of them become social media stars for things that aren't great. They're not becoming social media stars because they have a wealth of intellect that they want to put out here, but they become social media stars because they're doing crazy things, or they have a lot of money. And so they're just doing a lot of money, just showing off their money, or they're doing crazy things like doing a lot of pranks and things like that. And then the body image issue. A lot of the singers, rappers, performers have altered their bodies in a lot of different ways. And as you may or may not know, these alterations to your body are very dangerous. They have the Brazilian butt lift that they talk about. And amongst the medical community, they say that is the most dangerous cosmetic surgery that there is out there. And it's you can look all the time. You see somebody who's lost their life because they went and they got themselves a cosmetic surgery. And it's not, they went to this country or went to that country. It doesn't matter what country you go to. It's still a dangerous surgery. And so unfortunately, the role models for a lot of our young girls, and we've talked about this many times, are people who are augmenting their body and basically, sending a signal to the young ladies that, hey, you gotta go under the knife in order to be happy. And so the question became, where's the role models? And the if you think there are role models out here, you may be like, all right, we're good. They got the same amount of role models that we had. I don't think so. When I look at what I had in the 90s, now, some of the people who were role models in the 90s, we later found out they had a lot of skeletons in their closet. But as far as who they were publicly at the time, they were putting off a positive message. I'm young enough or old enough, or however you want to say it, that Bill Cosby at a time was somebody you look towards. And you were like, well, because he's advocating for education, higher education. He's advocating for Black people being looked at in more than one light. You don't just look at them as, oh, well, Black people are just this. But they can be, they can be this and that. We can be a teacher, and we can be a lawyer, and we can be a doctor, and we can be a custodian. We can be everything. Positive role model. Now you look at them now, and you look at some things that went on, but we had role models. In my time, you would look at a Jesse Jackson, or you would look at, you had different folk in my time, and then you look now, and you're like, well, who do they got to look up to? And so why is that? And is that our fault as the general population? Like, what are we doing? What are we advocating for? What are we talking for, and what are we talking against? What are we supporting that we think is entertainment that then turns around and becomes a role model for kids and pushes them down a bad path? We got a comment. So years ago, you looked up to people in the church, pastors, deacons, mothers, missionaries, etc. You also had people in the community you may look up to. Role models most often came from the communities that you lived in. And that's another one of the big issues and the big problems. Where are the kids at? We can all acknowledge the kids are not as much in church. So who are the role models that they're looking up to? Because if they're not going to be sitting here in church, where are they? We know that a lot of kids are sitting out here playing sports in the AAU. And so who are their role models? They're looking up to the coach. Now, the coach may be a great person. Might be. But it looks like most of the local role models nowadays are in sports. I deal with the Boy Scouts. And so I know the struggle of it is to get young people to do something other than sports. And so if coaches coach, some of them coach because they like helping out kids and they're positive role models. Some people coach because they want to win, or a large number of people coach because their kid is there and they want to get their kid into college, or they want to get their kid to whatever league, or they want to do something like that. So role model wise, it's a tough one there. But if the kids are not in church, how are they going to look up to the pastors and the deacons? How are they going to look up to the mothers of the church and the missionaries and other people like that? If they're not in the youth program, which, again, these things are smaller than they've been in the past, how are they going to have an opportunity to get in contact with people who they can look up to as role models, as people who are in the community doing things, people who are not going to encourage you to go out here and just be all about money, or can talk to you through the sports lens, or can only talk to you about augmenting your body and things like that. The pressure that are put on these kids so much so nowadays because of the amount of money, fashion and money and things like that. The pressure is so high. Finding a role model that can sit back and tell you, hey, that stuff really doesn't matter. That's where you need to go. And then that puts also a lot of pressure on the school system, because teachers sometimes were role models. And other than sports, other than this craziness of the TV at home, the only place that it seems like they're going to school. And so is that on us as the community? Why, we need to make sure that our kids are exposed to different types of people. They need to be in church, I believe. They need to be in other organizations that aren't sports, whether it be something like a scouting organization or the youth group. Even if you don't belong to church, be a part of the youth group or the youth ministry at the church, or they have different little groups, men of valor, or junior fraternities and sororities and things like that. But they need to be exposed to more things than just social media stars, and especially not reality stars. I mean, we could have a whole other discussion about how bad that is, and detrimental that is, not only to young people but to the older people who are watching it themselves. Public role models are subject to public attacks. Our society seems to enjoy taking down public role models. You know what? That is what it is. I think that's the price you got to pay. You get so much public role models. Yes, you get so much now. You get so much money. You get so much fame. You get so much attention that they're going to try to break you down. But in that time period that you are here, you can do some great things before you get broke down. Before all the skeletons that are in your closet come out, maybe you can do some great things. I'm gonna go back to that Cosby example. At the end of the day, for decades, he sat here and he encouraged young people, especially young Black people. I know, and I've said this before, and I know amongst me and a lot of my friends, when we were young, we immediately, you're talking in elementary school and middle school, immediately knew that the goal, education-wise, was to graduate high school and then go to college. And it wasn't like a conversation that you had to have with your parents. It's because you sat back here and you saw the Cosby Show, and then you saw different work, which was Black people going to college. And you said, well, that's the standard. And that's what I need to do. And that's where I'm going to go. And so, he is responsible, Bill Cosby and some others, but he's responsible for really putting that into people's system. I'll get Spike Lee's another one for making collegiate movies as well. And so you got people who did a lot of stuff, but then later on, maybe we found out they're not the greatest person. Maybe they've done some bad things. Maybe they weren't a good person at all. But in that decades, and those decades where we thought that he was, did a lot of good. And so I think that's the cost. I think as a person, if you get put out there and you have to be a role model, you may not be great, but in that time frame before you get, and it sounds horrible, from the time that you become a role model until the time that society takes you down, you get the most good and the most things done that you can get done. At the end of the day, you can't take back you can't take back all the people that you inspire. You can't take that back. Like, you know, my friends who went to college because they saw a different world or were motivated, and that was one of the extra motivations to go to college. They're not going to sit back here and say, "Oh, well, Cosby was a horrible person. I'm going to go take my degree back." Like, no, we've already been inspired. We've already succeeded in our endeavors. We're going to high school to college. We've already experienced and learned and met friends and got degrees and got expanded our brains and knowledge and whatever we've done. There's nothing you can do. You can't take that back. And so I'll say this to anybody out there, or a lot of people out there: if you think that you should be able to put yourself out there to be a role model and you're not perfect, go ahead and do it. Because again, they can't take back what you give them. They can't take back the good that you give, even though you may not be perfect and they may rip you down later on. They can't take it back. Can't. And so I do think it's a responsibility for us to kind of not support so much craziness, and especially in the Black community. I'll say that's us. It's a responsibility for us to stop supporting so much craziness. And I know it's fun, and it's all fun and games when we're watching some of these shows. And it's all fun and games when we're supporting some of these individuals and these stars and things like that. But if it's got to be to a point of where all this craziness and knuckleheadedness, and this is me sounding like an old grumpy man, but all this knuckleheadedness and craziness, all these reality stars, especially all of these shows, and y'all know what I'm talking about: Basketball Wives, Love and Hip Hop, rap, young rap star, whatever these shows are. At some point, we got to get that up, and we got to really, And I'm advocating. I don't like it. I mean, personally, I don't like any of them, but I'm advocating we got to chill out on it, because we're sending a horrible message to our kids, and it may be fun for us to watch in the meantime. But what about all the bad that is being done? The reality of the matter is, if you stop watching it and your friends stop watching it, it's going to stop getting all of the attention that it needs to get. And then hopefully our kids will look at something a little bit different and a little bit better. And so that's a sacrifice that, of course, it's a sacrifice that I can make because I don't watch it. But I think that's a sacrifice that some of us need to make on some things. Like, there's certain things that I won't participate in and won't watch, not because I don't want to and I don't think it's cool or don't think it's entertaining. It's because I know that it's not good. It's just not good. It's funny, but it's just not good. And so some of that we need to leave alone. And I think that's what it is. I think our role models end up being the mess that we end up watching, or the mess that we end up supporting. And so, yeah. And then at the end of the day, for parents, the role models will be where you put your kids. And so if you put your kids in front of the TV all day long, then their role models will come from the TV. If you put your kids in nothing but sports, and you have a kid in elementary school and you're calling them a student athlete, well, then their role model is going to be their coaches. If all you're doing is, pushing your kids towards certain things, that's where their role model is going to be. So if you have your kids in different activities, you have your kids in church, then I think that's where role models are going to also be able to come from. And there may be some diversity in the people that they look up to. And then it won't be one of the biggest issues that they have out there is that they don't have good role models. That because of the role models that they do have image issues and bullying issues and self-esteem issues and peer pressure issues at a larger scale than they have in the past, because they don't have anybody to look to that's that has the character to know that I got kids looking at me and I need to act a little differently. Back in the day, even back in the day when I was young, and I was there in a little earlier time of rap. So you're talking the 80s and 90s. You're talking about guys like Tupac and Biggie, and you're talking about older guys, KRS-One, LL Cool J, and other things like that. As foolish as you may think that they acted, I do believe back then there was still a standard of how I'm going to walk, of how I'm going to look, of how I'm going to approach this, because kids are looking at me. You even had the basketball players talk about, I'm not a role model, don't look at me, but they walked a certain way. They kept it to a certain degree. And that may be me being overly optimistic about what was going on back then. It may be because we didn't have social media and you couldn't get into all their business back then. But I do think that there was a different level. There was a different standard. And nowadays it's a little bit loose and a little bit wild and a little bit crazy. I've looked at some of the the rappers and entertainers that they have to look at. And it's just like, gosh, y'all don't have nobody to look up to for real. It's just a handful. And if you're young, you probably could bring up like 10 or 20 names and be like, well, this person's decent and this person's decent. But on the grand scheme and with the internet, looking up and researching what some of the issues were, it was that kids can't find good role models, and they're not finding good role models to be able to help kind of just somebody to look at when it comes to issues. Another comment. All of us have skeletons in our closet, but even a drunk who tells the kids not to play in the middle of the street can share what's right from wrong. Absolutely. I do think that's right. And I think that's what we all need to remember. And that comes to another issue, with some of us, it's more of a newer issue than it was an older issue. It takes a village to raise a kid. So everybody will put in their 2 cents if need be. And nowadays it's a little bit more, don't talk to my kid type situation. And so, we got to get over that. None of us are perfect. And so we all need to step up and be a role model in an instant. And so I think, like what it says in this comment, like even the drunk can tell the kids not to play in the middle of the street. I mean, sometimes we just need to open our mouth. And I think kids will respect that in the sense of, wow, this random dude or this random lady cares enough about all the people in the community that they'll say something to the kids, that they'll say something to me. And you don't know how much that changes folk or touches them. You don't have to be perfect. You just do what you're going to do. Just do a little bit, and you can be a role model. That reminds me of a person that just passed away. A guy named Reggie Perry, and he was a guy. When I was young, and a couple of people were young in the church that I would go to, he would come around and he would help out with us. Not perfect person at all, but he put in the effort and he impacted our lives. And so that's being a role model. You don't have to be perfect to go out here and do something, but I think we need to do the things that we need to do. Say what we need to say. Step up in the moments. Let's step up a lot more until let the kids know, hey, you don't need to be doing such and such, or congratulations for doing such and such. Let's speak that positivity and speak that that guidance. But we got to step up and say, because I like this comment. All of us have skeletons in our closet, so everybody can be a role model. Anybody can be like just that, person to come out and say things and do things. And I don't think we do that enough. I really don't. Another comment. We've heard it said, do as I say, not as I do. Yeah, that is true. It's funny. I remember when I got one of my first jobs, all the people at the job was like, hey man, you go to school. You make sure you go to school because you don't want to wind up like us here working in a factory. It was a little factory where we did parts or something like that. And they were like, you don't want to wind up like us. So you stay in school and you make sure you get a good education. Now, they were trying to be helpful and role models. And they were trying to basically say what it says. Do as I say. You go to school, because we didn't. We messed around. That's what they were basically telling me. We messed around and we didn't really fully apply ourselves. And now we're working here in this place. And you're young. You're working here, just as a summer job. You make sure you don't come back here and you work here permanently. It was a nice gesture to sit back and say, hey man, do better or do different. Not that their lives was bad, but they just had a higher expectation for me, even though they didn't even know me that well. They wanted something more from me, and they were like, hey, do as we say, because we've been around and we know. All right, famous football player. His name is Jameis Winston. They asked him, about himself, and they said, well, he was a number one pick football player. He was the number one pick coming out of college, so he's supposed to be great, all-time great. And they asked him a question. They said, basically, why? What happened? Why weren't you greater than you are? It said it in a nice way. Why weren't you greater than you are? And his answer was, when he was growing up, all his life, he dreamed about making it to the NFL. And then he made it to the NFL. But that was his dream. That was it. He said he didn't dream big enough, and he was very specific. He said you ask God for. He said he asked God to get him to the NFL, and so he got in the NFL and had a great career. He's been in the league for 11 years, made millions of dollars as a quarterback. He said, but I didn't ask God to be a Super Bowl winning quarterback. I didn't ask God to be the best NFL quarterback. He said, I didn't dream big enough. And so as a result, he got what he dreamed for. And so he says, you should dream big. Dream if you dream big and then dream even bigger and dream even bigger. Because you will probably get, God will bless you with what you ask for. But then you'll realize what you asked for is not really what you want sometimes. And so there were some other people who tried to analyze and kind of, break down what he was saying. And, basically they said the same thing in the sense of, whatever your goal is, whatever you dream for, whatever you ask God for, you're going to end up working towards. But the problem is, if you didn't dream big, you'll work towards the goal that you want to get, and then you'll stop right there, where you should be working towards the bigger goal. That's deep, and we can go real big into that. Make sure you understand the dream big. Even at your older age, I don't care if you're 80 years old, whatever your next dream is, dream it big. Real big. If you want to own the apartment building, say you want to own a fleet of apartment buildings and dream to that, and then you'll work towards that. And then even if you don't get the top, you'll get the next. But the point of this is, this guy is not someone who is considered a role model. But yet he's speaking the truth of how he sees his life, not blaming other people and doing things like that. And that comment and that statement is what it means to be a role model, or what it takes to be a role model, is to just talk your experience and your truth, your experience and the truth that of the life that you've lived into the younger people. And I think that was just such a powerful message, but it was just an example of what we need nowadays, especially in the Black community. We need people who are going to speak and just put out the truth for young people to hear and be role models. And not even the young people. That was a role model statement to one another. I look to that statement. I'm like, wow, man, that's, and he's significantly younger than me. And so I think that's, as we're at our time, I think that's where we need to be. We need to have a concentration on being role models. Us being role models, all of us, and a concentration on putting our kids in a position to see better role models. This is not me making this up. This is, again, I was researching what are the issues with young people, and that's what it brought up. Of course, they have a lot of image issues. You have social media. It's crazy out here nowadays. But some of the solutions to the image issues is that they need people to look at, and they need role models. And that is our job, to identify them and put them in a position where they can find better role models. All right. Like that. I appreciate all the comments that were put in. Again, please consider, what we were talking about. Don't let this conversation, this is always Impact 2025. Don't let the conversation just die out. This is a conversation that you then need to take and have with others. Role models. It's always been an issue, but I think it's even a bigger issue now. All right. Well, just to remind people again, Thursdays, 7 o'clock, right here, Facebook, YouTube, 7 o'clock, Eastern Standard Time, right here, Facebook and YouTube, is our weekly Bible study. It's a wonderful time. Please come and participate in that. On Sundays at 10 o'clock, Eastern Standard Time, Facebook, YouTube, and in person at the address that's on the screen, we have our weekly service, worship service. Please join us for that. And then on Tuesdays today at 7, from 7 to 7:45, we have our time of prayer. Please join us for that as well. And then we always have Impact 2025. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for all the comments. And please join us again. Have a good one.